Warning: the following podcast features views and opinions that are likely to trigger the extreme fanboys and fangirls who disagree with them. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome back, everybody, to Hot Takes with Billy Biz, the final season. Today, my guest is someone who is not here for his final time. I think he's slated for like 2 or 3 more episodes. You're going to get a lot of them because you love him every time we come, Mr. Victor Dandridge.
Hello.
So I called you for this specifically because back in season 2, you and I talked about Terminator 3, Rise of the Machines, and we got into a very great, one of my favorite episodes.
Thank you.
Talking about kind of the interesting choices that movie made in regards to Terminator. So lately I've been thinking a lot about Terminator. I don't know why. Probably 2020. Everything just feels like Skynet took over. And I was having a conversation with someone, and I was like, well, yeah, the Terminator is the best one. I think it's the best movie. And they're like, what? Like, it was just insane that I would say that. And then they're like, well, what do you think of, I get asked all the time, what do you think of Terminator Dark Fate? And I just got all these Terminator questions. I was like, I really can pinpoint where this franchise got off the tracks for me.
Okay.
And so that's what I want to do today. Usually this show's very binary. We're talking about one movie. Do I like it or do I not? We're not going to do that today. Today we're going to look at the entire Terminator franchise.
The whole thing. Okay.
The whole thing. The whole kit and caboodle. Start to finish. And I kind of want to just go through with you and see, maybe we disagree. That's the one thing I love about you is you and I see eye to eye on almost nothing when it comes to our media, but you're my favorite person to disagree with. But I think that there are definitely, at this point, I was just even doing research on Terminator. It's like I looked at Salvation, and then I looked at Genisys, and then I looked at Dark Fate, and every single one, go to their Wikipedia pages. It's hilarious. Every single one says this was intended to be the start of a new trilogy, but poor box office performance canceled those plans.
Canceled it
3 times in a row. So really, I think it's up to us now to figure out why is Terminator something that we just can't get past.
That's such a great premise already, but I first have to find out something very, very important.
Yes.
What was your first Terminator movie?
So this is very interesting because I thought that I was in a vacuum on this, but I found like culturally, especially people of my age, I'm 34.
Right.
I found that this is actually way more common than I thought, which was I saw Terminator 2 long before I ever saw the Terminator.
Okay.
I think Terminator 2 was the one that had permeated pop culture so much. And I wasn't really allowed to see R-rated movies, by the way. The first time I saw this movie, I kind of half watched it because I knew I wasn't supposed to, and I had kind of a guilty conscience, but it was at Curtis Randall's birthday party.
Shout out to Curtis Randall.
Curtis Randall, who's now Kurt Randall, and he was kind of my, like, I don't want to say nerdy friend, but he was like, he was like the string bean kind of kid with the glasses. And now he's like jacked. He is cut.
So when he says, my name is Kurt, you call him Kurt.
Oh my God. It's like he's no longer Curtis. He's Kurt. And you put some respect on that name. Like on the off chance that he is listening to this episode, dude, you are shredded. And if I'm ever in a street fight, I'm calling you first. But I watched the Terminator. Actually, you know what? I'm going to amend this story a little bit. Okay. So I half watched Terminator 2 because I know I wasn't supposed to, but I was like, okay, there's a lot of cool things in this. Some stuff that scares me, but some cool stuff. The actual first start to finish Terminator anything that I watched was on, get this, it was on a church trip.
Whoa.
Yeah, a church trip to Universal Studios, and I saw T2 3D Battle Across Time.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And I was like, okay, this is pretty cool. I like this. And then I convinced my mom at that point. I was like, can I please just watch? I saw Terminator 2 3D. Can I watch Terminator 2?
You gotta watch it for the culture, Ma. Let me do it.
So I watched Terminator 2 and I was blown away. But at that point in time, for whatever reason, and I don't know, maybe someone listening, there was like a special super duper edition of Terminator 2. It was actually like one DVD and you would turn it over the other way.
I have that.
Yep, the flipper disc. That was like super, like that was the DVD, but the first Terminator, while it was on DVD, was like more rare, was just like not really around. I don't know if it went out of print. So seeing the first one didn't happen for me until they re-released it on its own little flipper special edition in 2001. So for me, Terminator 2 was kind of the start and the finish of all of it.
Okay.
So that was a very long-winded answer.
No. But it does set the stage though, because like, okay, so I'm a little bit older than you are, and so I remember seeing the first Terminator in the 80s. So like I was fully aware of what the Terminator was by the time 2 came around. So it does paint a different picture for me, because my feeling is like Terminator 2 is the best sequel of all time. Like there's not another movie with a sequel that's better than Terminator 2, because it took everything that you knew and then upped the stakes perfectly. So that's, if that's where you started, I can understand a little bit better why your presentation of 1 or your receipt of 1 is higher than mine.
Sure. And I first of all, before we even get into this, because I'm about to say some stuff about Terminator 2 that I know is going to upset people. I just want to point out, I have, you probably can't see it, but over there I have the bust of the T-1000, the Gentle Giant Studios with the big hole in his face. I have a Chinese theater poster of Terminator 2. I love Terminator. I love Terminator 2. I even really like Terminator 3. Go back and listen to that episode if you want to.
Yeah, you're so weird.
And we'll touch on it just a little bit, but the bulk of that conversation is in that episode. But I love Terminator 2. But there are definitely things about Terminator 2, even though they are great in that movie, I think definitely I'm going to point a finger at, like, this is kind of where we got off track. So let's start with the Terminator. And I kind of want to at least lay out like why I think this is the best one.
Okay.
What I think is so great about 1984's The Terminator is that it is not really a sci-fi movie. It's not. It's a slasher movie. It's a horror movie. And I think the thing that I love the most about it is it feels a little bit like a Philip K. Dick story. It is self-contained, kind of a little bit, which was very kind of reminiscent of those 80s slasher flicks or those movies, was that it has this kind of dour ending. It kind of leaves you on this note. It's almost like a pessimistic tone about it. And before we get too far into this, I sent you this morning a YouTube link that had the deleted scenes. And there's a deleted scene in there at the very end where you find out that, Sarah Connor and Kyle Reese took on this Terminator at the very end of the movie in this factory. They defeat it, but Kyle dies. There's a deleted scene where Sarah's being wheeled out on a hospital gurney and two guys find the microchip that was part of that smashed Terminator, and the camera pans back, and the factory was actually Cyberdyne Systems. And had that stayed in the movie, which in my head, it's headcanon. I mean,
of course.
Terminator 1 is a closed loop. That movie is a statement unto itself. And I really, really appreciate that first Terminator movie because of its limitations.
So what's really interesting is you are absolutely right, because what they did with that particular movie is they told a whole story, and while technically Terminator 2 does tell a whole story, it does like kind of driftfully leave it open for more. And obviously the rest of the franchise is predicated on what can come next, what can come next, what can come next. But those first two, and definitely Terminator does have that very finite closed storytelling bit that almost all movies had at the time. I think the only thing that didn't do that was like Star Wars.
Right.
And that's a hallmark at the time. So
but even Star Wars, you can argue A New Hope on its own.
Right. But the reason why I say Star Wars is because Empire had come out by the time of 84, because Empire comes out in 80, and Empire clearly sets up that there's going to be something else, right? So beyond that, though, everything was really about the closed loop story. After that, now it gets different, because obviously Back to the Future opens things up for the sequel series, but that closed story thing, that was hard and fast rule of almost everything.
Well, what's interesting too is on that same video of deleted scene, and honestly, all you have to do, listeners, is just go to YouTube and look up literally Terminator deleted scenes. It's the first video that pops up. But there's another deleted scene that's really interesting, and it's Sarah gets this idea like, hey, here's the address to like Cyberdyne. Let's just go blow it up, and none of this ever happens. And I think it was wise of James Cameron to take it out of that movie, because what I think ultimately, when you look at The Terminator, it's not really about the future war. It's not really about Skynet. It's almost inconsequential why the Terminator is there, to the extent of the tension doesn't come from this idea of like changing the future, an idea that they would put in the second movie. The whole movie, the second movie is predicated on that. But this, I think that's another thing. The second movie leans into that sci-fi. It leans into the time travel, whereas the first movie feels so much more intense and so much more personal. Also because it's two people versus one machine. And I think that, to me, like, there's something very visceral, something very tension-filled, that even though I love Terminator 2, like, that element is gone the minute that you put machine versus machine.
I can definitely see it that way. Let me posit this though. Yes. Is this Cameron repeating something between The Terminator and T2 Judgment Day? Is he repeating something that he saw actually happen? And was kind of responsible for it happening with the Alien franchise, where that's the core facet of the Alien franchise. Yes, on the Nostromo, there was multiple crew members, but when it comes down to it, it was Ripley versus the Xenomorph, right? And that one-on-one bit, and even how the Xenomorph like attacks the crew is still very one-on-one throughout the entire first movie. But then when you get to Aliens, it is an army of Xenomorphs versus the literal army. And there's something where it literally changes the context and genre of the film, where Alien is, like you said, a horror-based movie, and so is The Terminator. It's a horror slasher flick, but the sequel is absolutely sci-fi and more about, because I mean, you're absolutely right with that deleted scene. There's a redundancy to Terminator 2, because that's what they do. They go to Cyberdyne, they blow it up. There's a huge redundancy with that plan, and it's interesting that obviously because he took it out of the theatrical version, they don't respond to it as though it's a replay of her initial concept. It is brand new because he knew that he had never really shown that as part of the plan. It didn't fit the vibe of the story initially. So I think it works that it was more included in the second one than would have worked.
100%. Look, it's honestly, I think these deleted scenes, I wish the Cyberdyne one was in it. I don't like. There's commentary on the DVD that these were on, and he was like, you know what? I wanted the ending to be an emotional one, not this kind of logic one. Okay, I don't think this really changes that much, other than like that's a cool button. But I think it was really smart to take out Sarah having this idea in the first one, because then the movie becomes something else. Then it becomes a quest. And I think that's the difference between 1 and 2 also, is that the first one's a survival story. Plain and simple. The objective is to not die. The second one, I think, it yes ands that by survival, but also we have our own objective away from just not getting killed by this other Terminator, which is to stop Skynet. That is emotionally a different arc. And to me, I think simplicity is going to be my key word in all of this, because I think that's where Terminator starts to get off the rails, is when it's like, okay, what if we add this? What if we do that? What if we do this? What if we do that? Where it's like the simplicity of the first Terminator, I think hits you over the head harder. Sarah, to me, is a little bit more of a believable character in the first one. It's almost like, I don't know, when I watch Terminator 2, that's why like it's very strange watching Terminator 2 first and then seeing Terminator 1. So like, I don't recognize how
soft Sarah doesn't make no sense.
Yeah, I don't know how we got here. And even by the end of the first one, the first time I watched it, I was like, oh man, I still there's a fine chunk of things missing before. But here's the thing too, and I want to posit this because when I watched Terminator 2 recently, I was like, I had never really thought about it. But there's kind of this old it's not an old saying. I don't know why I was going to say it was an old saying, but there's this old kind of idea, this kind of like unwritten, unspoken thing that Return of the Jedi, since we're talking Star Wars, was a little bit of George Lucas's do-over of some of the stuff that he did not like or didn't have time or the money to do in A New Hope, specifically talking about Jabba's palace being kind of like, this is kind of what I wanted to do for the cantina. When I look at Terminator 2, and if you were to lay each scene out on a note card and you stacked it up against Terminator 1, Terminator 2 is almost like a big budget remake of T1 because they hit a lot of the same beats at the exact same times. It's like, for those listening, it's like, oh, we have the nightclub scene in Terminator where, you know, he finally comes up on her and resaves her. That's exactly the same beat as no, it's the hallway when the two Terminators are coming,
when they're
and you're like
at the mall.
And you're like, who's coming for her and who's protecting her?
Right.
Then the hospital is definitely a bigger scale of the police station. Like you, and then of course the ending again. It's like not only we're in a factory, we're in like a factory with lava. Like it definitely. Obviously, there's stuff that doesn't translate between the two. But my point being is that to me, it almost felt like the jump from El Mariachi to Desperado.
Okay.
Where it's like, okay, now I have this budget. Now I can do all this stuff. I'm gonna definitely expand it, but I'm gonna kind of do a mulligan on some of these ideas.
I find that very, very interesting because I can see it. Definitely, I can see it. But for me, there's a contextual thing that makes it make sense, and it's the fact that it's robots. And robots are going to do the same thing over and over and over again. Like it's like, ironically, that's the folly of Skynet. Skynet always does the exact same thing, always. And it picks a target, sends a Terminator to eliminate said target. And sometimes it has enough information and sometimes it has not enough information. So in the Terminator, Arnold's, you know, T800 or T100, depending on what, you know, designation you want to give it, didn't know what Sarah looked like. So he literally goes to an area and starts picking Sarah Connors to kill. Goes through a list. Boom. And the T2, it knows what John Connor or where John Connor is supposed to be and literally hunts him down specifically, not just randomly looking for John Connors, but figures out or knows exactly where this kid version of John is supposed to be, and then starts to systematically hunt him down in this exact same way. So it almost works to me on that level that it does repeat because there are a bunch of robots that are doing the exact same thing over and over and over again.
But see, here's the difference. And I love that you pointed that scene out because I think that scene to me is exactly what I point to when people are like, what's wrong with these Terminator movies now? And I'm like, go back to that very first one. We have made Terminators. The wrong takeaway from T2 was that the Terminator needs to be bigger and better each time out. Because if you think back to the visceral scene in the first one where he goes to the wrong Sarah Connor and shoots her in the head, it's the inefficiency of that Terminator, but the determination, like,
he was going to make it happen.
I'm going to do it. The fact that Terminator is just like this crazed serial killer, as opposed to like, oh, I can smell your butt particles and find you. Like, I think that's too. The other thing is like, and I've never held this against T2, but like it has to be reconciled somehow. You know, they make it known in both T1 and T2 that Skynet lost. They lost the war. This wasn't like if we do this, we could still win. This was like our only option because we are done. Is this last ditch? Let's send them out right now. So why are they like? It doesn't make sense. It's like, okay, so you had a great one, a good one, and a okay. So it's like, why not just send the most efficient one to the most efficient time? Like, the more you keep sending them back and the better that they get, the more illogical the premise of Terminator becomes.
Yes. Well, and to a huge degree, it is illogical because, again, you're talking about robots who fundamentally cannot change, that are seeking change. Like, that's what they're trying to do. And to your point, I think that's one of the things that makes the Terminator so interesting is the Terminator is failing because it's a robot trying to change something. And that's not normal. Like a robot trying to change things is out of its mold, literally, pun intended. Whereas the job of Kyle was to keep the status quo. You keep Sarah alive. Granted, there's a lot more to it. Like, not only are you supposed to keep her alive, you're actually supposed to have some good loving with her one time, because otherwise it still doesn't happen. Like, there's so many crazy things that must maintain in order for this to work. And that's the interesting part. They are about maintenance. Whereas in T2, everybody's about change. Everybody, which is where it gets a little crazy. Though, it seems as though the Arnold's, role in that one is to keep John alive. John now has a Terminator as a child, and he doesn't believe his mom, and then has to change to believe what she taught him this entire time. He didn't believe her. Like, he thought she was crazy. This is why she's locked up. Yes, he has all these crazy, fundamentally, like, amazing skills for a 10-year-old or 13-year-old, however they screw up, how long it is from 1984 to 1991. But that's the thing, is they are all trying to change stuff. And that's where
John's arc is the same as Sarah's arc from the first one. We're doing the same story, sort of, just with a different character. No, not sort of. It is. Like, Kyle Reese is Sarah Connor to John.
But not where we pick up the story, because he knows. The thing is like, so, okay, I liken John to, and forgive me to any readers or listeners that have small ones around you, but we're talking about a dark movie, so you probably shouldn't do that. Imagine if you were a kid who believed in Santa Claus, and then all of a sudden something happens and you lose that belief in Santa Claus, and then you find out that Santa is actually real. That's what I took it as, where Sarah was a blank slate. She never saw any of this as possible. The thing with John is that he knew that there was some portion of it that his mother taught him, and he believed it for a while until conventional practical wisdom told him, no, she's crazy and you shouldn't believe any part of what she says, until he's confronted with the truth that she's been right the whole time. Because otherwise, I think we wouldn't have the character adherence to the fact of what a Terminator is. He would have denied it, consistently, because it took her a long time before she recognized what a Terminator was. Kyle continuously had to convince her until the police station what it was, but he didn't have to be convinced nearly as long. He just had to see it and recognized immediately what it was that he was dealing with. I think he knew from the moment he saw Arnold at the mall. Like, he was running from a cop, he sees Arnold and knows everything that his mother has ever told him is 100% true, because that's what you are. I know what you are. I've been told about you enough times that I recognize you on sight, even though I've never seen you in my entire life.
By the way, I love that you pitched Tim Allen's Santa Claus.
It's right there, right?
There's also something I just thought of this whole time, where it's like, this is where time travel starts to get loopy and hard for anybody. Yes. But it's like, there must have been some series of events where John sends Kyle back, not knowing that Kyle's his dad, because it hadn't happened yet. Right. In which case, like, what a crappy thing to do. You send a human to protect your mom, but you send two Terminators to protect you. And
that is so true.
What an a-hole. Okay, but look, all those aside, look, we can nitpick plot and time travel to death, but I think still my argument just being that, like, if you're on the street and you're asking me why I like the Terminator better than Terminator 2, I think, like, it's just an emotionally cleaner story to me. Mm-hmm. While I understand everything you're saying about John, I still could reasonably say, like, yeah, but it's pretty much Sarah's thing from the first movie, and like, and again, I love Terminator 2. I'm not crapping on Terminator 2. I'm just saying, like, if I had to say one was stronger than the other. Now, Terminator 2 kind of blows everyone away, and I still think, like, 90% of the stuff in Terminator 2 holds up, like, visually. Like, it's cool. But I think this is the start of, what we were talking about, which is like, well, the Terminators have to keep doing cooler stuff. And on top of that, this is where another thing starts, that even though I like T3 is like one of the worst offenders of this, is that a machine fighting another machine, like picking up toilets and breaking them through walls and shooting guns. Like, there's no stakes, and it's not interesting. I know you think that's what we want, but as the series goes on, and we get these really, like, Terminator Dark Fate has this big blow up in the car factory, where it's like the half woman, half Terminator versus a Terminator. I'm just like, but they're bionic. Like, this is the same argument that people make of not liking the Incredible Hulk at the end, where it's like, oh, it's just two video game characters. Like, Terminator on Terminator violence is not interesting because there's no stakes involved.
Right. Well, okay. It's interesting that you say that, because I think I can see that in Terminator 3 being very, very true. It's less true for me in Terminator 2. Because
I agree with you, by the way. I'll let you keep going. Okay. But I agree with you. I'm just saying, like, if I had to trace it back, I think they'd be like, I get that, though. It was cool here. Yeah, let's do it again. It's like, no, I think you missed why it was cool in Terminator.
Yeah, because one of the things that really was the point was in Terminator 2, Arnold's Terminator declares that Robert Patrick's is better than him. Like, he says it from the earliest position, and it creates that sense of David and Goliath. Like, it's the same scenario of sorts as sending a regular human versus, you know, Arnold's the Terminator, because it's a David and Goliath situation or scenario where there's no reason that the Terminator should not win, and that's clear. But the more that you keep sending the T800 model and it keeps succeeding against a version that is supposed to be better, you lose the stakes. So after T2, to send that same model to fight whatever the T designation was in Terminator 3, it's weird because like, we know you're gonna win, and it doesn't make any sense as to why you're gonna win, considering all the things that you now can do, you know, like shooting things. Like, I thought that was one of the more interesting facets of the T1000, is though it is technically better, it is resolved to a more primitive weaponry. Like, it's sharp things. It is swords. It is before guns. So even in the sense of it being able to mimic people, take on different forms, its most efficient way to kill you is old. It's still, you know, classic stuff. So it has a better balance than if I can shapeshift, all of a sudden I'm wearing Prada and I turn my hand into a cannon. Why? Like, and you're absolutely right. Like, in that regard, send that one back to fight Sarah before she's anything. Like, all of a sudden, you know, her roommate dissolves into whatever this thing is and blows Sarah away before she ever goes to work that day. Ta-da! Right. Like, you know, that's just weird.
Yeah, and you know, Terminator 2, this is the last, it's not even a crap on it, but it does, I guess it doesn't matter, but it does to me. I think, especially if you had seen Terminator 1 first, and then you go to a movie in late 1983 or early 1984. Actually, sorry. You see the first Terminator, then you go to a movie in late 1990 or early 1991, whatever it may be, and you see a trailer for Terminator 2. You're like, awesome.
Right.
And in this trailer, they're like, and this time Arnold's the good guy. And it's like, why would you tell me that now? And this would start a trend, by the way, of the Terminator movies specifically giving away the best reveals of the movies in the trailer. But I do think, like, this movie, I can't be in James Cameron's head, and I can't say what he wanted, but I get the feeling, the way that the first 20 minutes of Terminator 2 is paced and the way that it's laid out, is that it's supposed to be ambiguous, especially, like, imagine you never saw a trailer, you never saw anything. You saw the first movie and you're coming to this one, you're like, Arnold's a Terminator, that means he's a bad guy.
Right.
And I think that moment in the hallway is supposed to be like, when he says get down, it's supposed to play as a big moment, like, oh, he's the good guy this time. The problem is, take the trailer out of it.
Right.
You've already kind of tipped your hand to me the minute you play the Bad to the Bone song and you do the pan up with the glasses, because you've kind of already, like, you settled me a little bit. You got me to smile, or you got me to kind of chuckle at the irony of it. And it's like, I kind of feel like if I could re-edit this movie, I would take that moment out before I showed it to someone who's never seen it, because that may be the only thing that kind of gives it away to me.
Well, I can definitely see it from the whole standpoint of, and this is me being super critical of a obviously a movie that I love. At that point, Arnold had not been given the lesson that it's not okay to kill, right?
Right.
But ironically, he goes to the bar, assaults a bunch of people, but he doesn't kill a single one. Why?
Right.
Like, he's a Terminator. Why doesn't he kill anyone? Because I would argue that they're more violently aggressive towards him than in the first one when Bill Paxton and his punk crew, he takes their clothes. These guys, I mean, like, dude puts a cigar out on him. Another dude stabs him, and then the cigar guy pulls out a pistol and is getting ready to shoot him before he takes it. These guys have put in way more effort to assault him, and he'd be totally justified to just be like, "No, I'm just going to kill these guys because I'm a Terminator. That's what I do." And John hasn't arrived yet to tell him, "Don't do that." So you're absolutely right. It plays its hand that he's the good guy way too early, even outside the trailer, which, again, for those that have never seen the trailer, they totally told you in the trailer, which is one of the worst things that they could have done. Like,
which is something that happens multiple times in these Terminator movies going forward. But this was definitely the first where it's like, oh, that would have been a cool
surprise
moment in that if you had gone to that movie and the get down, you're like, whoa, wait a minute. Yeah. I can't reasonably think that anyone went into Terminator 2 and was surprised by that.
No, because literally they do show it in the trailer. Like, they tell you that he is the good guy. That's absolutely true. Yeah.
So, Terminator 2 definitely, while the first one is kind of like, yeah, it's time travel. And I love that they actually address it head on in terms of, like, they ask Kyle, like, well, how does this? He's like, I didn't build the effing thing. I don't know. That's one of my favorite parts of the Terminator, because it's like anytime that there's like a time travel thing, it's like everyone's just an expert. It's like there has to be a guy that just does. It's like if I showed up at your house, you're like, how does your car work? I'm like, I don't know how a car works. It just does. But Terminator 2, goes out of its way. It's like, okay, this time we're going to try to kind of like get more into the sci-fi elements. And I do think, like, the time travel in this movie is unclear. I'm more inclined to think that it's a little more Avengers Endgame than it is Back to the Future. Whereas if Skynet is destroyed or whatever, the Terminator's destroyed, that doesn't mean that the Terminators and John are just going to like fade away or whatever, because then it'd be weird. I think it's like whatever happened, but it's not going to happen in this timeline.
Right.
So we leave Terminator 2 with like anything's on the table now. Then we get to, and it's left ambiguous. I think those questions of like, wait, shouldn't John be gone or anything like that? Like, I can do the kind of the juggling in my head, but it's definitely like it can raise those questions.
Yeah.
Terminator 3 comes along a lot later. We talked about this at length, but I think what Terminator 3 does is it basically says, okay, Terminator 1 closed the loop. You open the loop back up again with Terminator 2. The only way or the only place we have left to go with this is to once again close this loop. If Terminators do exist, if all happens, then their Judgment Day must happen. And I still think, regardless of whatever you're about to throw at me, that even if that movie feels slightly made for TV-ish,
which it is, you're right.
The last 5 minutes of that movie are just so bold and closes it again that it's like, yeah, this kind of had to happen. However it was going to happen. Now it undoes the entire thesis statement of 2, which is there is no fate but what we make for ourselves.
Right.
But we will see later on with other Terminator movies that James Cameron put his little stamp of approval on that do the exact same thing. So as Terminator Dark Fate comes out, I kind of have to take that strike away from Terminator 3 of like, well, it undoes the second one. It's like, well, clearly we have no problem undoing the second one.
Right.
You have to. You have to.
Yeah, because in the second one, it's funny because the terminology that you were using, which is why I had the screw face, was I would say that the second one closes the loop because it makes everything that's supposed to happen impossible. So like Cyberdyne is destroyed. The data at Dyson's house is destroyed. They destroy the T-1000 and then they get rid of all of the parts and processors that were available in that time period. So they get rid of everything that that deleted scene, set up in the Terminator. There's no material for these guys to kind of play around with and snoop around with and figure out. The thing that does make it interesting, though, is they close it. Terminator 3 opens it back up by saying, okay, fine. It's not, it wasn't a self-satisfying prophecy where the Terminator comes back and the remnants of the Terminator is what inspires the building of the Terminator system. It is just the general progression of what we do. We create an AI, and the AI does in fact make this, scenario happen. I think the folly of Terminator 3 that Dark Fate tries to do is, when you say that this outcome is inevitable, change up some of the parts and pieces that still make it inevitable. So instead of it being Skynet or Cyberdyne, it's a totally different system, but it's a system nonetheless. Like, what Sarah and John did in T2 worked, but that's the thing, is like you did in fact, because your goal was just like the T1000 of changing things, you did in fact change it, and this is now the new change. There are still some things that you can't do anything about that are going to happen, but for a huge part, everything changed. It's not just the date of Skynet's arrival, but what Skynet is. They call it something else. They call it Netflix now.
Call it Legion.
Right.
I think Legion is, if we're going to keep using Return of the Jedi, it's Death Star 2. It's the same thing. And look, whether you feel, I guess my thing about that is like, okay, well, why was it such a terrible thing that Judgment Day was postponed in Terminator 3, that people were just like, I hate this. But then when they're like, oh no, it's just called something else in Dark Fate, people are like, man, this new one is just like exactly what James Cameron wanted. It's like, guys, we've done this already.
Saw this already.
Yeah, we did this. We did this with Genisys too. Like this idea that something replaces Skynet is, again, to use a Star Wars thing, it's like now it's Star Killer base from like a planet killing thing. So let's talk about Terminator Salvation, because on its face, I was like, yep, this is the way to go now. This is finally something that we haven't seen. To my knowledge, maybe someone out there can correct me, but I believe that Terminator Salvation is the only movie that acts as both a prequel and a sequel to the movie that it preceded.
Yes. It's a pre-sequel that only has ever happened in a video game. So
yeah, I was gonna say, like, unless it's like a video game or anime,
right?
The only movie I could think of. But I was like, okay, this is finally an era of Terminator where we're not trying to stop Skynet. It happened, it's done, cool. Again, the loop is closed, but now we get to see part of that loop that we never got to see before. We got glimpses of this future war, but a whole movie set there, awesome. The first trailer, I remember it debuted with The Dark Knight, and it was awesome.
Yes.
And then they had another trailer, and it had a Nine Inch Nails song in it, remixed to Terminator. I was like, this movie is going to just blow my mind apart. And it did, but in the worst way. I think Terminator Salvation, more than any other Terminator movies, is the most disappointing.
Yes,
because it was so close to being exactly what that franchise needed. It's like, how did you fumble so hard?
It literally failed for all the wrong reasons.
What were your thoughts in 2009 seeing Terminator Salvation? Was this one where you're like, okay, I could get on board with this?
Well, yeah, because again, as stated in the previous, hot takes, I didn't love T3. Like, I didn't like it, and I had a lot of issues with it. So, one, the change in temporal scenery was already a breath of fresh air. Like, I thought that was a brilliant move. Like, let's go to the future and let's see what it's like there. And that's where the story is. I'm like, already that's a win. To see young Kyle, again, nothing that we've ever seen before. We're going to focus on Kyle Reese now and why he needs to survive in order for John to send him back. I love that. Like, let's go. It's a total flip of the story that we know, but it doesn't change the story that we know. It is just a different perspective, different placement, and that's cool. I enjoyed Sam Worthington as a concept. but that was it.
That's what his parents said, by the way.
Terrible, but can't say it's not true.
Yeah, look, I'm with you. And I think adding Christian Bale in this immediately gave it this like, oh, well, you know, especially at that point in time, was like a stamp of approval, like, oh, they wouldn't be doing this. He wouldn't be doing this movie if it wasn't great. I think Bryce Dallas Howard was a great kind of like, I'm not calling her an upgrade of Claire Danes. I'm calling it like an evolution. Like I saw, like I could see how you came from that character. And I, most importantly, I loved that John was not in charge when this movie starts.
Right.
I love that John is still like this crazy guy that because I always thought like, man, John has all this insider information. Why wouldn't anyone think that he was a part of Skynet? You know,
like
he knows
you
all
clearly are part of all this. You're predicting this is going to happen. You're a Terminator. You are a Terminator. Yeah.
So I loved all of that. Where this movie is just goes so far off the rails that like honestly, it can't come back from it. Is the Austin Powers theory of the whole point of this is that Sam Worthington's character, whose name I can't even remember now, he's half man, not even half. I think he's like mostly Terminator with like a quarter man, whatever it is. He's human at its core, but he's definitely a Terminator. And their idea is like, well, all these Terminators that we send to just do a mission and kill him fail. So we're going to have you infiltrate, get closer to John Connor than any Terminator ever has, win his trust, and bring him to us. And why I call it the Austin Powers theory is because I think it's in the second movie where Scott Evil's like, why don't you just go back in time and shoot Austin while he's on the crapper? If he's that close to him, why not just have him do it? It makes no sense to me. Like, what was the point of dragging John back? This is where we start to get into like Batman 66 territory of like, I'll put him in my evil egg Decatur, you know, my power plan. Yeah, like, and it does Batman 66 style. She just sits there and tells him this whole plan, like, oh well, we used you. It's like you know he's fully functional. You just fixed him. Why would you tell him that you just screwed him over? Like, I will never to this day understand why anyone thought that was a great idea, because how could your first thought not be, yeah, get in close enough that you could do it yourself right then and there, and then it's over.
And then it's done. And I think that's part of the the descent, the hard descent that this movie takes, because there were a lot of interesting points to it. The idea that the initial Terminators weren't like the X or the skeleton piece with like organics grown over top. It was organic people that they put, you know, the
so cool. Yeah.
I'm like, whoa, like that's dark. You know, he was a prisoner and on death row, and he agrees to this secret project, and that's what it becomes. And what? That's crazy. Like, that was dope. But you're absolutely right. When they get to the Scooby-Doo moment, it doesn't make any like it doesn't make any sense. You're like, why didn't you just shoot him like right then and there? Like, why did you wait? You know,
it's such a huge logic problem,
right?
That and it comes at such a time where it's just like, you lost me. Like, you can sometimes I'm just like, that's dumb, but this is cool. Okay. It's like, you lost me so hard right there that I was just like, this is I don't even care what I'm seeing anymore.
Right.
Like, it's just so like, I get it that Skynet is never been like total genius, which is like, how did you take over? Because you have no strategy or planning whatsoever. But it's like, this is incomprehensible. That is someone's last day at Skynet. If I'm if that was their plan.
This is when that program gets deleted, because
it's like, you know, anytime that a movie does this, that's when your brain starts nitpicking, because you're like, well, I've got nothing else to do. And that's when you start to notice things like, wait a second, how does Skynet already know who Kyle is? I guess maybe you could think like, oh, they have tapes of him from the police station back in '84, but it's like they didn't have enough information on Sarah to be able to peg her. So
let's be flat out honest about that too. Like, not only do they not have enough information about Sarah, how are they supposed to know who Kyle Reese is when he's not even born yet? Like, at this point, he doesn't exist. They shouldn't even register that he's from the future. Like this is the weird non-person that's just getting in the way. I don't know why he's in the way.
So the not shooting John on the crapper first takes me out of it.
Yeah.
Then the Kyle, like, how do they even know who Kyle is? Then I start really looking like, wait a second. If we are going into Skynet headquarters, like, shouldn't robots be able to just send like a radio message and the doors open? Why are there keypads that clearly like a human would use to get in? Like, it's just that's when you start breaking down, like, if this movie was awesome, that thought would never cross my mind. And, you know, I know the guys at the Honest trailers, they put this in one of the trailers, I can't remember, but it's so true. It's like, we watched this, which at the time I thought was really cool. I still kind of think it's a little cool. This kind of T-800 Arnold. It's like the very first one. And we watch him take another Terminator and rip it in half. And you're like, oh, that's you just awesome. Made Terminator scary again. That's awesome. What's the first thing he does to John? He bitch smacks him. He bitch smacks the guy when you just showed me like, I don't understand in these movies. Like, I understand it's like, well, you can't kill the good guy right then and there, but it's like, then don't show me what he's capable of, because the whole time I'm going to think like, why do you not? Yeah.
What are you waiting for?
Who are you dramatically posing for? You don't know that I'm watching this.
No, it's his T-800 girlfriend that's watching over on his side. Look at
this. Look at this.
Beat this guy. I beat him now. Yes.
But I remember that scene. I'm not gonna lie. Like, when I did see it in the theater, like, I was pretty checked out by that point. But I did kind of was like, oh, that's kind of cool when it was Arnold again, you know?
Yeah. Because
with the '80s haircut too,
of course, which is what makes that like such a great moment. Because one, for those that are watching, it wasn't actually Arnold. Because at the time he was governor of California, and he couldn't be in the movie. So that already was like a brilliant nod to all the movies that had come before. It was the perfect way to wink, nod, but still move forward and create something brand new. And then they screwed it up. And that's the thing. It's like when you are so close, you're absolutely right. When you are so close to getting it right, and then you just absolutely drop the ball, it is probably the most devastating thing possible. You know, it's
like, I remember, you know, at the time I was working in production, and there was someone that was on the crew of that movie, or had been on the crew of that movie. He's like, dude, this is so awesome. Like, the director, like, he did this crazy thing with the film where they like drenched it in silver and like baked it out in the sun. So that's why the movie kind of has this like really washed out but still like cool looking effect to it. Like, all of this was great, and then it's like my hype level was so high, and this I honestly, I don't think, you know, when you talk about like, oh, that was the relationship that made me not believe in love. This was the Terminator movie that got me to like not believe in Terminator movies.
Oh, I'm so
sorry. My guard never came down after Salvation.
I mean, and that's, but the thing is you're right too, because after that everything gets more convoluted. It becomes infinitely more complicated each new installment after Salvation.
I will say Salvation does avoid, just by the nature of what it is, it does avoid a lot of the trappings that, like, there's no Terminator on Terminator. That's great. You get to see the 600s, which I always thought was really cool, when Kyle's like, you could tell the old ones because they had rubber skin, and you saw that kind of like busted ass one when he walks into town.
You go, like, oh, you're a 600.
Yeah, like, I love that. I thought all that was really cool, but like, again, I think Terminator Salvation is a great example to use of like, you can have the coolest effects, you can have like the best actors, but if you have a bad script, you got nothing.
You got nothing. Yeah.
And I did hear how like what the original ending was supposed to be, which was very nihilistic, and, you know, John was gonna get killed, and then it was gonna be like this Terminator took his fate. All these different things. Like, look, you could have put any ending you wanted on that movie. I was done. Like, but that was supposed to be the start of a new trilogy. Now, where that trilogy could have ended, we'll never know. But I don't know. That's another one where it's just like, would the last moment have been him sending Kyle back? And would that even like, I don't know. I don't know if that would have resonated with me, if it would have been like,
no, I mean, if I could postulate, I think in the order of things, it would have had to have been, he saves Kyle, kind of raises Kyle in the first movie. By the second movie, Kyle is somewhat important to him, an assistant, you know, something like that, but he never tells Kyle what he is to him. He never does that. by the end of the second movie, he does send Kyle back, but the very end of that movie, John has to die. Like, because I think that's the thing is they have to be the things that reconcile all the first three movies. That's what Salvation's goal was supposed to be. It was supposed to literally solve the inconsistencies of the Terminator T2 and T3 and put it all into a cohesive order. And then in whatever the third trilogy piece of Salvation was supposed to be was his wife taking up the reins and possibly sending back the T-800 that was going to protect them at the beginning of Judgment Day. Like, that's where that should have been. But, you know, because that would have been a very interesting thing where in 3 of Salvation, I have to say that, like, in this hypothetical, their goal is to break into Skynet to get a T-800 that they can.
They have to get a couple,
right?
But it's weird. It's like that again. This is another thing with the Terminator that, and we've talked about it, but it's like this is where the logic would come in. It's like, okay, so you're telling me you found one T-800, one T-850,
right?
And then you found a girl who was half, you know, like
right.
This is where you're just like, either you pulled them off an assembly line or you didn't. And it sounds like from the movies you didn't, which is really strange that you just had a hodgepodge of Terminators. But sure, why not? So Salvation comes and goes, and it's not what any of us thought it was going to be.
Right.
And I'm disappointed in the sense that it's like the future war that kind of killed any sort of idea that we were going to go back to that time. It's like, I think that scared them. And then we got to 2015. And I think I may have talked about this, maybe not on the show, actually. I think 2015 is such a pivotal year of film that we don't talk about a lot. But everything that's happening in movies today, I trace back to 2015, because that was the year where we got Jurassic World,
yes,
Terminator Genisys, and Star Wars The Force Awakens. These were 3 properties that were meant to not just reignite these franchises, but were specifically targeting nostalgia. Like specifically. And the reason I say that is because I've told this story on Screen Junkies, but if you missed it, or I don't know if I've told you this, Victor, or you remember our friend Tucker from Wizard World.
Yeah.
I was at his wedding, and I was sitting next to this guy, and we get to talking, and it turns out he cuts trailers for a living.
Oh, that's cool.
And he was telling me that he cut the 3 movies I just named. He cut Jurassic World, Terminator Genisys, and Star Wars Force Awakens. And of course I had to ask him, because at this point I had seen Genisys. I was like, dude, what happened with that Genisys trailer? That is, you gave away everything that could have possibly been interesting in that trailer. He's like, look, all 3 of them came to us, and I got the same mandate for Star Wars and Jurassic World. I got the same mandate, which was do not use any shot from Jurassic World or Star Wars that doesn't look like a shot from the original movies. Don't use any music cues that were not used in those original movies. So if you go back, there's no generic stock music or hard rock or now is the favorite slowed down pop song into a dramatic. You're only using musical cues. He's like, they specifically wanted to target people to be like, remember how you liked this thing? He's like, with Terminator, they came to us and they said, this movie is kind of a mess and doesn't make a lot of sense. Get the plot out of the way in the trailer so that people will come to see Arnold Schwarzenegger back as a Terminator.
Wow.
So he's like, they don't want you to have to worry about trying to figure out the movie while you're watching it. They want you to be like, okay, I think I kind of get it. But Arnold's back. That's cool. That's what they wanted. And he's like, that's why we gave away the big spoiler in the trailer so that you weren't just like, wait, huh? When you're watching the movie. And I was like,
wow.
The fact that Paramount had no faith in this movie before it started, it's like, that kind of tells me everything I need to know about Genisys.
You know, it's funny because there's another big movie that came out in 2015 that you didn't name that I think does the exact same thing as that. And that is Avengers Age of Ultron. So I find that very interesting that the 2 robot movies have like this weird sort of explanation of plot that when you actually watch the movie, it becomes a mess. Like it's very, very messy. And we know, like for Age of Ultron, there were things that the studio wanted to impart because they were going to set up some things in the future, and they just want you to kind of come through and see the next Avengers movie, even though it doesn't really work as a culmination piece like Avengers 1 did, which really took a lot of its cues from the Phase 1 movies and kind of brought everything together in a nice, neat package. Age of Ultron doesn't really touch anything that came before it. Like literally we got Tony back in suits despite the fact that he's destroyed them all. No one's questioning where Shield is. Like it's just, hey, it's Avengers. Remember how cool Avengers were 3 years ago? Come back, watch it again. They're fighting robots this time. Boom. You kind of have the same thing happen with Genisys. So wow,
it's very interesting. Yeah, I wish I'm such a jerk. I wish I could remember this guy's name because he was fascinating. I ended up talking to him most of the night about just like the science of trailers. But when we talked about Terminator 2 giving it away, Terminator Genisys, the first trailer tells you, hey, in this one, John Connor becomes a Terminator and he's the bad guy, and you're like, oh, okay. They tell you that Terminator 2 didn't happen the way that you remember it, or you can't get back to that version of the timeline. Like, okay, they literally give away the scene from the Terminator. They're like, look, we're going back to the very first movie again, like just the way you remembered it. So Terminator Genisys doesn't even feel like a story to me. It feels like a sequence of just like, hey, remember this? Hey, remember that? Like,
it's a YouTube compilation.
Terminator Genisys maybe 3 times, and I still am like, I don't really know what happened. And also, Terminator Genisys does what we were just talking about before with like, if you're going to get into the time travel, you better come up with your own set of rules, because we said, oh, Terminator 2, maybe it's like Avengers Endgame where like it, whatever happened in the past happens and this is a new future. But at the end of Terminator Genisys, this version of Kyle, who has the personality of a piece of cheese, goes up to his younger self and is like, don't forget, you have to remember this thing because it's going to happen. And it's like, wait a second, I thought this was a whole new time. Like, now you're saying that it is a closed loop. Like Terminator Genisys, oh man, it's not even a swing and a miss. This is like hit by the pitch.
Only it's T-ball, so that's really bad.
Yeah. It's like, how I don't know. I think, you and I, like, this is peel back the curtain. I wanted to do a podcast 4 or 5 years ago. And it was with you, and the first episode we were going to do was Terminator Genisys. And I think like a month after I asked you, I was like, I'm sorry, man, I can't watch this again. I've tried a couple times and we never ended up doing it.
No, we didn't. And it's funny too, because it is literally the one Terminator that I can say I've only seen once. I've only seen it one time in the theater.
Yeah.
My family and I, we saw it as opposed to watching the fireworks in my hometown.
Oh yeah, it came out 4th of July weekend. That's right.
Yeah. And yeah, and I guess what makes that one so bad is, again, just like Salvation, it had a cast that should work. Like if you run off the names, I mean, Emily Clark and Arnold and like literally everyone that's in that movie, you're like, this should be amazing.
J.K. Simmons,
right?
You're like, cool, yeah.
How do you mess this up? They found a way. Life finds a way. Yeah.
It was just everything that we've been talking about for the last 45 minutes was like stuffed into one movie. It's like, do you want to see some crazy T-1000s and Terminators that don't really make sense? Here you go. Do you want to remember those scenes you really liked from the other movies? Here they are. Turning John into a Terminator on its face, like, okay, that's interesting. Sure, John has been this like messiah for reasons we never know. We never know why John is so great. I guess maybe Terminator Salvation insinuates that he's so great just because he already knows what's coming.
Right.
But in terms of being like this great strategist or whatever he is, like, I don't know why John's great. So sure, turn him into the bad guy. Why not? But it's like, then it's just like, okay, so he turns into a Terminator and then he comes back in time. But it's like, why? You're Terminator. Nothing makes sense. They're just kind of like, because it is. Just, you look, helicopters and Cyberdyne. Like, I'm like, but no, what are you trying to say? This movie doesn't say anything.
Right.
It's not a commentary on anything. it adds nothing new to this idea of Terminator. And that's where I was like, whoa, 2 strikes. It's like, I know in baseball it's 3 strikes are out, but in movies and TV, like 2 strikes on a reboot is really impossible to come back from.
That is fair. That is very, very fair. So when they announced Dark Fate, did you see it as a true continuation of the series, or did you understand that it was at its core a soft reboot?
I knew Dark Fate was, I mean, I feel like, you know, they put out a lot of like featurettes and stuff on YouTube that was like, this is the true sequel to Terminator 2. Mm-hmm. And you know, that's the other thing. James Cameron, I don't believe a word you say about Terminator anymore, because you praise Salvation, you praise Genisys, and then you turn around when the next one comes out and says like, oh, I only did that because Arnold's my friend. He said that twice already, like twice. So as soon as I saw the Dark Fate trailer, it's like from James Cameron, I was like, nah, that means absolutely nothing to me.
Right. So this kind of plays into a very interesting sort of thing. The Dark Fate that we got is not the Dark Fate that they had intended. One of the things that I've learned behind the scenes specifically is that John was supposed to have a different role, if not a bigger role, we'll say, than what occurs in Dark Fate. Dark Fate, for those of you that haven't watched it, spoiler alert, John dies very early, right? From what I understand, Edward Furlong was supposed to return and be a John from a different time that is an adult and has a bigger role. Some things happened where the company decided not to go in that direction. I don't want to say anything that would make your podcast liable. But I do wonder if, again, with that sort of Frankensteining of story, you had an intention, and because of whatever outside, you know, means, reasons, whatever, you stray from that intention. That's got to be a terrible way to try to tell a story, because your cohesion is out the window. Like what you had intended to do, it's not even like a matter of saying, well, we're going to get a different person to do it. You're doing a totally different story, which has got to add to that weird fuel of why is this not working? Well, that's why, because you don't have that cohesive thought throughout the whole thing. You are literally trying to Frankenstein a franchise together, and that's not good. Not good at all.
That's exactly how I would describe Dark Fate, because the online buzz, at least in my Twitter timeline feed, was like, this is great. I'm sad that no one's seeing it. This is a return and all this stuff. And I finally watched it and I was just like, it's a movie. I'll give you that, but it's like everything in Terminator Dark Fate is reheated leftovers from the other movies. And that's not to say that, like, I think they did some of those concepts better in Dark Fate, but it's still like the half person, half Terminator. That's from Salvation.
Right.
The T-1000 that comes back, and, you know, look, I love the diversity and stuff. Like, I have no issues with that, and I get it. Like, this was a tough movie to kind of criticize in that regards, because a lot of people did finally feel like, you know, this took place in Mexico, and, you know, like, it was a woman protagonist and everything. Like, I'm not taking that away from you. That's not even my criticism. I think my thing is more just like, we already got a lot of these concepts in these movies already. Like, even Sarah Connor coming back as this grizzled old lady with PTSD. It's like, we just got that with Jamie Lee Curtis in Halloween the year before. Like, this isn't even like, you know, the Terminator being an old kind of man that's a little bit more nurturing. Like, we got that in Genisys. Like, all this stuff is like, this is a movie that just feels cobbled together. Like, just take the things that worked from each movie and try to make a new one out of that. And it's like, there is nothing in Terminator Dark Fate that feels inspired, that feels fresh, that feels new. You know, the Legion being the new Skynet feels, like I said, like Death Star 2 or Starkiller Base. Like, I wanted to like Dark Fate, and I actually, the first 5 minutes of that movie are actually the most interesting. It's all downhill from there. So it's like, oh wow, we're really kicking things off, and then it's like, but then you got comfortable and you reverted back to Terminator on Terminator violence, which is never interesting to watch, and another Terminator that just bitch slaps everybody because
instead of killing them.
Yeah, it's just
right.
I don't need to see the Sarah Connor firing a bunch of shotgun blasts at this thing that you've told me 5 movies ago doesn't work. Like,
right.
There's just no, and again, it ends in some sort of refinery or dam or it's all like this industrial, like nothing about this. And by the way, the model that they sent, like this is where I start to nitpick. It's like, okay, well, the model that you sent back was a T-800. He kills her at the end with a power cell, but you told me the power cells started with the T-850s, which is what you had in Terminator 3. Like, you're not even trying anymore. You're just like, ooh, power cell, that's neat. Use that.
Let's use that one. Well, and it's funny too because it does. Ironically, the one thing that I kind of judged all of the other Terminator movies up to that point, or we'll say from T3 through Genisys, the thing that always bugged me was how come you only sent back one, right? Like, obviously, I saw the upgrade version in the T1000, and I'm like, okay, it's a better version of a Terminator. That makes sense. Okay. Totally, and you're sending it technically after a little kid, so you're upping the violent nature of the thing that you're sending, and you're sending it for someone who arguably should be able to do much less. So that is a clear, upping of your veracity, if you want to look at it that way. But why have you never sent more than one? Like, that's weird to me. And this is the closest to solve that. It's kind of like, as much as I decry the value of Age of Ultron, I always thought that was one of the more interesting moments when, they have that big hero moment and Thor's like, is that all you've got? And a bunch of Ultrons show up and they all kind of look at Thor like, you just had to say that, didn't you? Like, what's wrong with you? That's the type of thing that Skynet geniusly should have done, is like, oh, no, I sent a bunch of these after one person. Screw you. And the thing that I think that this one ultimately fails at is the fact that it's still just one Terminator. They don't talk to each other. They don't have different overt skill sets where when the liquid metal one is away, there's something that the other one can do that is clearly more dangerous. Like, where is the real rationale for why this thing functions the way that it does, other than just the ability to separate? Like, that separation should have purpose and meaning. Like, maybe this thing has such a weird radioactive core to it that when the liquid metal part goes away, everyone starts getting sick because now they're getting radioactive poisoning. Like, how insane would that be, where you literally want them to be together? That makes things safer for everybody. But when they separate, it's just way worse. Like, it's just such a terrible idea that you need them to be together. That wasn't there, So it's again, so many different good ideas, horrible execution.
Yeah, if I had the thing is like, it's like Salvation is easily the most disappointing.
Yes.
This is kind of a close second. Maybe it was the hype of people saying like, this is a return. I didn't think it was a return. Certainly not to a form I'm interested in. I also just think that it's, I don't know. I wonder if this had been Terminator 3, maybe I probably would have been interested. But by this point, it's just like I'm burnt out on Terminator. Yeah. I would rather, and again, like I'm not using this as a criticism of the film itself. Like, I always hate when people are like, well, they didn't do this. It's like, well, it's not a bad movie because they didn't do your idea.
Right.
But I think for me, like, again, it's just like, this sounds dumb of me to say, but hear me out. I think Terminator needs to stop doing these huge stakes, the world rests on one person's shoulder stories, because I think you tying it all back to the first one, it's like, yeah, she's the mother of basically, cyber Jesus, but it's still a very personal story. The stakes at this point is just these two people. To everyone else, it doesn't really matter at this point. And I think, like, imagine if you saw, like, I kind of, not to turn the show into reboot it, but it's just kind of like, I would love if, like, you almost, what are the Cloverfield in me, where I think, we're following police detectives and there's a serial killer on the loose, and halfway through the movie, you find out, like, the reason this guy keeps getting away is because he's a Terminator. Like, oh, this is a Terminator movie. Like, Terminators, I think ultimately we said this in our Jurassic Park reboot, and I think this applies to Terminator, which is like dinosaurs in Jurassic Park movies are not scary anymore. We're not afraid of them. We were the first one, kind of the second one. There were some moments, but by the third one, we're not afraid of them anymore.
Right.
I'm not afraid of Terminators anymore. I still watch that first one and I'm just like, I'm creeped out. It's creepy to me. It's like, it gives me the chills. Mm-hmm. You got to make Terminator scary. And I don't think making a Terminator scary means they can split themselves in two and they can turn into weapons and they can do this and they can do that. That's not what makes it scary. What makes it scary is its determination. Right. And in my opinion, going back to that phone book scene from the first one, it's the inefficiencies that make those things so scary. It doesn't care if you are the right one.
Right.
It cares that you are on its list.
And
you have to. Imagine if there was, look, my name is William Patterson. How many William Pattersons do you think are even in like a 20-mile radius?
Right.
Probably at least 10. Could you imagine if I turned on the news today and there were like 3 people named William Patterson were dead? I'd be flipping out. And that kind of like guttural fear, they need to find a way to bring that back. That's the only way, in my opinion, that you make Terminator relatable again, is you strip it way down.
Right. Well, and I think you're absolutely right by the way that they, in the first one, they dodged the understanding of the severity, and that's what worked. Like, no one understood the stakes that were at play, but in all the other movies there were the stakes, and everybody that was a main character knows it. You know, with Sarah, like they make that joke. Is it when she's at work or her roommate is like, hey, look, you're dead.
Yeah, and you're dead, honey.
Like that's funny to them. Like they're like, oh, that's so crazy. There are no stakes to them. Like they have such a, you know, cleared palette that the things that are happening are just things that are happening, and they're weird and they're off-putting, they're unsettling because you don't understand why. From T2 forward, everything has a purpose. And that's the thing that I think you're getting back to is get away from the purpose of it all, and just some wild stuff is happening to people. Like that's it.
Yeah, just make it a horror movie again. I kind of think like, you know, Alien is a great series to parallel because I feel like it's going down similar tracks. You know, its sequel kind of shied away a little bit more from the horror, more into action. The sequels keep kind of expanding the mythology in ways that are not necessarily satisfying. They've tried a couple of these different reboots that are not satisfying. And I'm really interested now that they announced that Alien's going to be this TV series, because I think like that's an interesting way to take it, which is why we don't have to spend a ton of time on it. But I do think the one piece of Terminator that came out in the last decade that actually did, or 2 decades now, wow, it's been a long time. Yeah. Was Terminator, the Sarah Connor Chronicles.
Yes.
Now, because this was on television and because it was episodic and it was serialized, it kind of forces you to think a little bit differently. It's not about spectacle, because it's strange when you think like, oh, a great Terminator movie, action sequences. It's like, well, you know, sometimes the spectacle kind of glosses over the inconsistencies in the storytelling. Right. But with something like a TV show where it's like, man, you blew your load on FX budgets and that one episode, I'm going to get 3 bottle episodes for that one cool sequence. And we're talking Terminators.
Yep.
I think they introduced a lot of cool things in that show that's like, you know, you just said, why didn't Skynet send more Terminators? But let's send a bunch. It's like, well, the show kind of posits that like the Resistance or whatever had the same idea. It's not just Kyle went back in time and Terminators are going back in time just to protect one person. They have agents that they have sent back in time gearing up for like all throughout history, which I'm like, well, that's cool. I don't know if it works all the time, but it's like, at least that's a cool new wrinkle, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Were you a fan of that show or?
Okay. So this is a horrible admission. I never watched it.
Oh no.
And the reason why was at the time it went up against something else that I was watching, and I didn't have like TiVo, and it wasn't a matter of I could, you know, record it and watch it, but I've never watched it. And I feel so bad because I've worked with Summer Glau for panels and whatnot, and obviously it's spoken of highly, and I know she was great in it because I love her, but I've never watched it. So
I mean, it does definitely. There's a formula to the Terminator that it doesn't deviate from, where it's just like she is a Terminator and she comes back to protect John and her mom. But the one cool thing that the show did, that like just by the nature of her being a younger model, I don't know how you know what I mean. Like she's her model number is meant to fit in with a younger crowd, I should say. John develops feelings for her, and I know he kind of has this relationship with the T-800, but it's more like your pet that you are like kind of sad when you have to flush the fish down the toilet or bury Sparky in the backyard, whereas he develops romantic feelings for Summer Glau's Terminator. And this is the first time that a Terminator is very smart, and when her programming gets corrupted, she uses that against him. Like there's an episode, and I don't want to get like way too in the weeds, but it's important to talk about. There's an episode where her programming gets screwed up. She's going after John, and Sarah kind of traps her with a truck, and she's going to crush this Terminator. She's like, "I know you were sent to help us, but if you're going to be a nuisance, we got to get rid of you." And she starts crying, and she reaches out to John. She's like, "John, please, I love you." And it's like John is just like torn because he like, and his mom's like, she's lying. She doesn't have love. She doesn't feel it. That's not real. And it's like playing on those emotions. It's like that one moment in a TV show has more emotional weight than every sequel that came after Terminator 2. Like,
Yeah. Oh my God.
That's what it's like, the human element. We're talking about how robots have taken out humans, and yet in these movies we completely neglect the human element of a lot of it.
Well, and that's the thing. Like, that's part of what made the Terminator so creepy. Is it was an inefficient facsimile of what it meant to be human. So even to the point where he's decaying, right? He's been shot, hurt a couple times, stabbed. He's decaying. He stinks. Like, his room is nasty, and the hotel manager says something to him, and he tries to figure out what is the most human thing that I could respond with. Like, he's got a list of things, and it's a curse, but he has to pick which one sounds the most human for me to respond with. That's what he's learning to do, to be more human, to be a better killer. The other movies, they don't do that very well. Like they miss that part.
Actually, you know what I think is the best Terminator movie? Maybe even better than the Terminator is Ex Machina. Ex Machina is the best Terminator movie that has come out since those first two, because that's exactly the kind of like, those are the questions left to talk about. Like, I don't need to this whole chosen one trope is so played out in all of media. Like, I don't ever want to hear about another prophecy. I don't ever want to hear about how one person was born into saving us all. But I love this idea of Ex Machina. Like, you really have to ask yourself, like, what makes a person a person? Like, is it what makes a human human, and what makes a robot? Is it feelings? Is it memories? Is it like all these things? And it's just like Ex Machina did it so brilliantly that it's almost too late now. Like, like if Terminator did it, it would just feel like,
you're just gonna be an Ex Machina.
Yeah. It's like, I almost wish we could just rebrand it. It's like Terminator : Ex Machina, and it, like, honestly, it works. It totally works.
It sounds pretty dope, actually.
Yeah, right?
Maybe that was like, when did that come out?
2014, I think. It was like right before Genisys. It was like a year or so before Genisys.
It was where Genisys was supposed to go.
Yeah.
Dang it.
Dude, could you imagine if I hadn't seen any, I don't know, maybe I lived under a rock for like 3 years and I hadn't seen anything for Terminator Genisys. You're like, dude, there's a new Terminator movie coming out, and you took me to Ex Machina. I'd be like, dude, that was the best Terminator movie.
But it's not a Terminator movie.
You're like, dude, it's a little art house. It's art house Terminator. I'd be like, okay, I'm interested.
Let's try it.
But I think that's kind of what Terminator is missing. And then the first one, kind of like, I love that it's a horror movie, but it doesn't really ask you to think about those things. The second one kind of asks you about those things, but it asks you with like a megaphone in its hand right next to your ear. Like, what do you think about consciousness and fate?
Is it someone's fault if they're gonna do something wrong in the future? Could we punish them now?
As they're beating you over the head with a metal bat. Yeah, like as much as I love Terminator 2, like let's be real here. It asks a lot of questions, but in the most like meathead way possible, which is fine. Like it hits. It's still good. It's still fun. It's still great sci-fi.
I mean, it was the highest-grossing movie in 1991, and that sounds weird to say, but literally, like, if you go back to some of the movies that came out in 91, or some of the actors that were like getting their breakout in 91, that's kind of a big deal. I mean, Leo DiCaprio got his breakout in 91. I think Brad Pitt got his breakout in 91. Like, there's a bunch of people, Juliette Lewis, all got their start in 91. And, you know, for Eddie Furlong for his first movie to be the biggest grossing movie of that year is insane. So there's something about it that was right for the time. Maybe it doesn't quite, you know, hold up with the, you know, advent of, like, I don't know, the internet. Like, we don't think about we think about these things differently now, because there are things that exist now that didn't then, that would have, ideally speaking, changed everything. Like, you could have in 84 the notion of the robot comes back and doesn't know who Sarah Connor is because we didn't have the internet. That idea becomes way more ridiculous as our technology literally, you know, grows and evolves. It becomes way stupider that future technology goes back and has less information.
I was looking as you were talking because I was like, oh, was it Terminator 2 or Beauty and the Beast? Either way, you're in pretty good company if you're battling with Beauty and the Beast. You know, you're not slouching. As opposed to like these Terminator movies, like now they're just like, you would never think in 1991 after walking out of Terminator 2, like, hey, in, you know, 20 years doing a Terminator movie is going to be a huge financial risk.
Right.
You know,
you're like, wait, what? No,
like
never.
Studios are going to play hot potato with the rights and buy it for pennies on the dollar. And it's a bummer. I really think that, you know, there's a lot of people that have come out of these movies that are like, the Terminator franchise just needs to end. It needs to die. It needs to go away and sleep. I do think it needs to kind of leave the consciousness for a while, but I definitely think that, look, if I'm in the captain's seat, the idea should be to strip it way down. You don't need to make a $400 million Terminator movie. I know the old school way of thinking is going to be like, people won't come see it. It's like, well, they're not coming to see it now. So take a different approach. Go back to its horror elements. I would say, you know, maybe rethink the, you know, ask new questions, do something new. And I'm not talking about subbing out Skynet. Like, this sounds strange, but it's almost like I would strip out a lot of the sci-fi elements of Terminator and just go, you know, like I said, like, I think Ex Machina is more the tone of movie. Otherwise, there's no story left to tell. Like, what are we really talking about here? Like, you know, there's a funny story. I was watching all the Nightmare on Elm Street movies when I was first dating my wife. And I just kind of went on a marathon. And by the fifth one, she walks into the room about halfway through and she just looks at me, and I'll never forget. She just looked at me and she was just like, what are you getting out of this? Like, she had been watching it for 5 days. And I kind of feel like that's where I'm at with Terminator. It's like, I watched Dark Fate and I'm like, what am I getting out of this anymore? Like, this doesn't challenge me. It doesn't stimulate me. It doesn't, like, I just feel like, you know, Pete Davidson, that SNL sketch was just like, okay, you know.
Okay. Woot.
Any last words from you on that? That's where I feel like, to close out the thesis statement, that's where I feel like we've gone wrong, is we just kept trying to make it bigger, expand it, bigger, better Terminators, more Terminators. And I think going bigger is where it went off the rails. Scaling it back, I think, is to get it back on track. Any thoughts from you? If you were tasked with saving Terminator?
No, I in all actuality, I think you're absolutely right in terms of what it would take to save it. I think Dark Fate tried to do that by, again, picking a nondescript, person of color, try to, that motif, but it still ends up going way, way bigger by them going to a military base and getting secret weapons. And like, it does continuously get bigger. And you're right. Like the more homegrown nature of a slasher flick makes the Terminator series work best. And I guess it's only because they tried to go bigger than what T2 was. T2 should have been the biggest that it got because it was the biggest concept. Like that's the biggest concept that kind of worked really well. And they looked at it and said, well, obviously that's what works. No. That's not what works because at its core, T2, while it gets bigger, its core is something very simple, is still a machine changing to be more human. Like that's what the core of it is. I now know
a bummer with the benefit of hindsight. You kind of understood franchising a little more back then. That's like right. Terminator 2 should have been like Terminator 3 or Terminator 4. It should have been the journey right. to like finally destroying Skynet or Cyberdyne, whatever
right.
it was.
But it never happens. Right.
Right. But it's just like, yeah, it was a 1-2 punch. And then it's just like, again, like, for every complaint of Terminator 3, it's like, you can say that about just about all of them, maybe except Salvation, where it's just like, there's no way to go forward, but to undo Terminator right. 2. Like you have to.
Well, yeah, because the thing is, and it's always been my impression that Terminator 2 was a movie not done to continue the story, but because the effects that you could do had gotten better. Right, they did it
which
because
is why it feels like an upgraded remake of Terminator 1.
Right. The thing with 3 and beyond is they thought that they could continue that story when that was not a story that should have ever been continued. Not that story. You can continue other aspects, but not that one because they had ended it to where it doesn't really work for you to try to continue that story and make it bigger. It doesn't work that way.
I mean, that's where the Terminator franchise is a great example of the movie business, the Hollywood business, where the question wasn't, hey, I have this great Terminator story. Can we make it? It was, hey, we have this great Terminator franchise. Can you make a story around it?
Exactly. And real talk, the last thing I'll say is I pray that is not the future that awaits the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is what my biggest fear is that they should have stopped at Endgame. And because they don't, that's what they'll do.
I mean, Endgame, look, any other movie, the wait for Black Widow would have been torturous, but it's not even because I'm not interested in that character. I just feel so satisfied that I'm like, okay,
That's what I'm saying. And I think Endgame is not that great of a movie, but it's a fantastic experience. So
I agree. I think Infinity War is, to me, a much better movie, but that's a different episode. We'll get there someday. But yeah, every franchise should kind of look at the Terminator franchise and study it of how does this like cash cow run dry. And I think bigger and better is not always the answer. Definitely not in terms of Terminator, but for the hardest working man in comics, you're always doing things that are bigger and better, and it does work. And in fact, I just got yesterday, it's down in my quote unquote mail room because I need to disinfect the mail, but I just got my comic in the mail from you, from the Kickstarter.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, The Trouble with Love, the trade paperbacks have gone out, and people are starting to get them. I was really worried that people weren't going to get them before the end of the year with mail being, holiday centric and all that stuff. But I can't wait for you to see some of the add-on pieces. I know you've read this story before, but this one has a few add-ons because I am, in fact, expanding the universe that it takes place in. I'm using Terminator as a reference and trying to do things far better. Make sure that while I am growing things, it is at a constrained style and rate. So that is my plan.
So where can people, if they missed the Kickstarter, can they still pick up the comic?
Of course, if you guys visit vantageinhouse.com, you can see my entire library of different books that I've produced as a self-publisher. You can check out the entire run of things. Also, I teach kids through my You Create Comics program, which is the letter UCRE, the number 8 comics.com. And it's all about utilizing comics in the classroom. I've been doing virtual panels with schools, after school programs, anything to kind of engage and empower learning, because a lot of kids are struggling with the virtual space, and anything that we can do to kind of make that learning experience better, I'm all for it.
I mean, you are the master of hustling. I mean, right now we are in a closed video session and you hashtag your name with hardest working man in comics when you knew I was the only one that was going to see it, but you just wanted me to know.
This is what I do. If you're going to be the hardest working man in comics, you tell everyone.
I will say before we head out of here, the reason why I love having you on is because, like I said at the very beginning, you and I don't see eye to eye on a lot of things. Right. But, and not even just pop culture. I think even like we've had some really deep talks about like different philosophies in life that we don't agree on. But I love that I can disagree with you and it never feels hostile or judgmental. It feels like a real conversation. And when the conversation's over, we're back to just being buds. There's no hard feelings. And I kind of wish, just with the 2020 we've had, I get it. I totally understand that it's like there are some lines that have been crossed by some people that just you can't go back. But I just wish more conversations just in life were just like me and you. I know this is starting to get a little like
whatever, man.
What's he going on about? But it's just like, I just wish this was the way it was. I wish this is how people in my life, I wish this is how we disagreed. I wish this is how we celebrated each other, even when we don't necessarily see eye to eye. Like, it bums me out that every relationship in my life is not like this.
I love you too. Like, that's long and short. Like and you're absolutely right, man. It's one of the things that I think we have lost as a society. We don't know how to respectfully disagree. And there are some things you're absolutely right there. You should not be respectful in the disagreement about. I 100% agree. But there are some things that you can just be like, that's cool. That's how you see it. I get it. Sometimes it's a matter of what is right for me just isn't wrong for you. That's all. It's like, it's not the thing for you. It's not what you would do. And I get that.
It sounded like I was giving you a send-off, like this is the last time you'll ever be on the show.
Hardly.
Which is not true. Even though this is the final season, you'll probably be doing more episodes this season than any other season because the conversations are just that great. I want to thank all of you guys for listening, if you're still listening at this point and tired of me blubbering my emotions. If you're still listening, check out Reboot It Season 4. We have officially gotten to the end of Season 4. We're hitting Justice League this weekend. We've been doing a DC movie just about every season, and we're finally bringing them together. And then, of course, once that ends, we will be doing our Reboot Rewinds, where if you really want to hear us get in our feelings, because this was a hard season, and if you want to hear me hash out some feelings I had about this season, Reboot Rewinds on the Reboot channel. And, of course, this is kind of a mid-season break for this show. A lot of people have been asking me, how long is Season 4 going to be? I know this is the last one. The truth is, I'm gonna Larry David this one. I don't know. It's until when I get to the point where I'm just like, I think it's time. Like, I've got 1 or 2 left in me, and then it's over. This could end in next April. This could end 2.5 years from now. Kiss is doing their final farewell tour, and it's 3 years long.
Right.
I've seen them 3 times on their final farewell tour already. Twice was in Los Angeles. So, wow. Yeah. But the point is, like, we're just going to keep going until it feels like it's time to stop. So I don't know. I don't have a good answer for that question, but I promise you, like, I'm going to keep just bringing out heavy hitters, like a whole franchise in this episode. Thank you so much for listening. If I don't hear from you anytime soon, or I guess if you don't hear from me, happy holidays, whatever you're celebrating. I know it's going to be a little bit of a different one this year, but nonetheless, I'll be back probably sooner than later. So take care, respectfully disagree, and love thy neighbor, and wear your mask, please. I'll send Tom Cruise on you.
Yes.
Have a good one, everyone, and I will see you very soon.